Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. I'm your host, 𝗘𝘅𝗽𝗲𝗁, and today we have with us Dr. Dan Columbus, a swine nutrition research scientist at Prairie Swine Center. So Dr. Columbus, we've had you on the show in the past, but would you mind giving the audience a short reminder about who you are and what it is you do?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a swine nutrition researcher at the Prairie Swine Center here, and also an adjunct professor at the University of Saskatchewan. So my big focus is just on doing nutrition research for improving sustainability of pork production.
Gotcha. And I saw a PowerPoint that you had on feeding low-protein diets and how to more accurately balance amino acids to avoid deficiencies that we might be missing. So would you mind telling us a little bit about that study?
Sure. Yeah, we've actually been looking at how the nitrogen content of the diet might actually change amino acid requirements. This research has come about as a result of the issue of reduced performance in some low-protein diets that are amino acid supplemented that we see. And it's been suggested that nitrogen or non-essential amino acids may be limiting in these diets, and that this obviously then will negatively affect pig performance, even if all the essential amino acid requirements are met. And this would also impact the efficiency with which essential amino acids are utilized for lean gain. Past work has shown that the essential amino acid nitrogen to total nitrogen ratio in the diet may give an indication of the sufficiency of dietary nitrogen as well as essential amino acid content. And when examining a range of ratios, Hager and colleagues in the past found that nitrogen utilization suffered at extremes, with low ratios indicating insufficient essential amino acids and high ratios indicating insufficient nitrogen. And they determined that a ratio of 0.48 was optimal across a number of species. So that's not even just in pigs. So we have conducted two studies that have examined the impact of the dietary essential amino acid nitrogen to total nitrogen ratio on the lysine requirement for nitrogen retention. And in the first study, we determined the lysine requirement in growing pigs fed a diet with the optimal ratio of 0.48 or the ratio of 0.55, indicating a diet that's deficient in nitrogen or non-essential amino acids. And important to consider that both diets met the requirement for all the essential amino acids except for lysine, which was fed at graded levels to determine the requirement. So we conducted a nitrogen balance collection after an adaptation period and determined nitrogen retention as the difference between intake and output in feces and urine. And what we found in this study was a higher requirement for lysine in a diet containing an optimal essential amino acid nitrogen to total nitrogen ratio compared to that deficient diet as a result of higher nitrogen retention or lean gain. And we also found that the percent of nitrogen intake retained and the lysine utilization for nitrogen retention were improved with that optimal ratio. We then followed this up with a second study where we wanted to determine if the source of nitrogen matters in meeting the optimal ratio. And this was based on past work that's shown that pigs are capable of utilizing sources of non-protein nitrogen in diets that are deficient in non-essential amino acids. Non-protein nitrogen being things like urea and ammonia, which the ruminant world may be familiar with, but this has largely been ignored in monogastrics in the past. So knowing this, we again determined the lysine requirement in growing pigs, either fed that deficient diet as indicated by the 0.55 ratio, or that diet where we had added ammonium phosphate at 1.7%, resulting in a ratio of 0.48 or that optimal. And we found after conducting the nitrogen balance the same way as that first study that the lysine requirement was increased in pigs receiving the ammonium phosphate containing diet, again, as a result of the higher nitrogen retention, showing that indeed the ammonium phosphate could actually be used to optimize that ratio and provide a source of nitrogen.
So one question I had is, so what exactly is the benefit of feeding or this feeding strategy for producers? Because from my understanding, from an economic perspective at least, the non-protein nitrogen source would probably be a pretty cheap ingredient, and so it could reduce costs by cutting some more expensive amino acid sources such as soybean meal. So would that be accurate? And is there other aspects to that I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, so I think the main benefit is just the more efficient utilization of the feed and optimizing that lean gain, right? If you're not going to provide enough nitrogen and you're adding lysine in, you're not getting the greatest lean gain that you can get or the greatest efficiency of that lysine utilization, which is going to end up costing money in the long run. With regards to the ammonium phosphate itself, products like urea and the ammonium phosphate are actually quite a bit more expensive than traditional protein sources. But where they become a benefit is you have to add significantly less of them to achieve the same increase in crude protein or nitrogen content in your diet that you would save for soybean meal. So overall, they do save quite a bit.
Gotcha. Okay, I didn't realize they were more expensive. For some reason, I had in my mind they were cheap. But another question I had. So with this, on the ammonium phosphate, I would assume I don't really have any specific knowledge of it, but I would assume it's not very palatable for pigs just because it's an ammonia product. Did you see any palatability issues at 1.7% with feed intake at all? Or if not, do you expect to see any if you increase it too much?
In this particular study, we didn't see any palatability issues. The pigs all seemed to eat, no problem. We didn't have any extra leftovers or anything after. It can have a palatability issue, though. Like you said, ammonium phosphate, urea would be the same thing. They tend to be bitter. But in this study, it's important to note that the 1.7% was actually the maximum allowable that we would be able to put in a swine diet according to CFIA regulations. And that's based on the percent of nitrogen that you are contributing to the diet. So I'm assuming that's based on some kind of palatability issue, but also what also can be an issue is toxicity, because you are actually introducing a large amount of ammonia into the pig. So if they can't handle that, you can actually end up with ammonia toxicity.
Gotcha. And lastly, what are you think the next steps for this line of research? Do you have any more plans to do any more research trials in the future?
Yeah, I think we're interested in seeing how this would actually alter requirements for other essential amino acids, especially those that might be more or have more of an impact on, say, nitrogen supply in a deficient diet. That might do that. We also want to confirm some of these with growth performance studies, just to see if what we see in a nitrogen balance is actually going to have the same impact when we look longer term. And also to quantify what the actual impact on, say, nitrogen excretion or the environmental sustainability is going to be.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all this data with us, and I think we'll look forward to some of those other research trials in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and to everyone else, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we are constantly on the lookout for the latest updates in swine nutrition. And if you have a swine nutrition related research trial that you would be able to share on our podcast, please send an email to nutritionblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to talk about your research. See you later.